Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The Texas A&M Aggies. I would really say a successful year one for Texas A&M, and I only think it's going to get better. I mean, you take a look at some of the player development, but I think more importantly, what Mike Elko is doing on the recruiting trail. To me, this thing, positive vibes. This thing's going in the right direction. How do you take that step in the transfer portal? We're really happy with the 2025 signing class for Texas A&M. Now it's about filling in some of those cracks, which there certainly are for Texas A&M going into 2025. We got a lot of names, Dill, because we both came up with a few. We've decided to keep them all, so we got a lot of names to get through. Fired up to get into it now. Before we do, and as always, to the Texas A&M fans, it's going to be a fun next couple of weeks. Still, it was a fun. I mean, you go back 12 months ago when Mike Elko took this thing over, active in the transfer portal. I would expect to see, probably not to the extreme extent, but you're still going to see a lot of activity. So it's going to be fun to break down the commitments. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, positions, players you would like to see Texas A&M address. And I would love to hear the Texas A&M fans' take on this. Still, the quarterback position, Connor Wigman out, Henderson out. You're looking at a quarterback room right now. O'Neal, who's going to be a redshirt freshman. Brady Hart, who the boys love as Michigan fans. Brady Hart coming in as a true freshman, and Marcel Reed going into his third year. If you're Mike Elko, Coach Colin Klein, what are you doing at the quarterback position if it were up to you, Dell?
And that's where I think it gets a little tough because naturally I think you'd want like a Caden Salter type guy.
Yeah, me too.
Now I think Marcel Reed, and I feel like a lot of some Texas A&M fans are down on Marcel Reed more than I am. I was encouraged by the end of the year for him. I thought his development as a passer really started to ramp up. Now there were still like those ball handling issues and some things that happened. But those mistakes, I feel like you can live with. I thought relatively accurate passer, relatively good processor, in the steps are made. So I do think it's going to be very hard to bring in a high-level veteran, but I feel like you need to do it.
So
not a high level, but you need to bring it.
Yeah, here's my take on it. I would add a veteran quarterback at the very least for some veteran experience in the quarterback room and some competition. Dill, my take on Marcel Reed is there were a lot of really good things that you saw, but I think it's also to keep in mind, this is a kid that hasn't played a ton of football until getting thrusted into the lineup. And then number two, it was a Texas A&M offense that was constructed around Connor Wigman. And then kind of halfway through the season, you got to go 180 and kind of run this offense with Marcel Reed at quarterback. And you saw some of those growing pains. And I would also add that, when Le'Veon Moss went down the run game, he kind of struggled a little bit. I wouldn't say the pass catchers on the outside were playing at an elite level. And so I do think, one, there's room for improvement with Marcel Reed year two if you wanted to build this offense around him. I think number two, if you can give him a better supporting cast, I do think he's a quarterback that can win you a lot of football games. But I would like to see, I think Caden Salter is a really good name to kind of throw in that quarterback room, have him and Marcel Reed battle it out, and then you look
especially because your offense doesn't need to be that different if you run it with those. I mean, they both have similar skill sets. So I don't think you bring in Miller Moss, you're in the Wigman versus Marcel Reed kind of situation where, well, Miller Moss doesn't do anything that Marcel Reed does, and Marcel Reed doesn't exactly excel at what Miller Moss does.
It's two different offenses with two different quarterbacks in that case. So you would probably want to add a quarterback that they have similar skill sets. I would agree with that.
What about a Dan Pierre from New Mexico State?
I love that kid. 100% sign me up. Just because when I watch a lot of Texas A&M football, he's going to be a really fun cat to watch. And even if he doesn't start, you can get that kid involved. He is a dynamite electric factory playing the sport of football. Big fan of him. I would be more focused on building around the quarterback room, though. Let's talk about wide receivers, which I think is a sore spot for Texas A&M. You have some talent, but I don't think that talent has necessarily hit in the way a lot of Texas A&M fans want. Noah Thomas, high on him. Terry Bussey, extraordinarily high on him. Jerome Miles coming in as a freshman. Think he can do some things. But I think you want to inject a little bit more dynamic playmaking ability on the outside until it doesn't get any more explosive than Kentucky wide receiver Barry Brown, a 10-4-9 guy coming out of high school. The Texas A&M fans who've been rocking with the fellas when we talk the recruiting trail, I'm kind of a track and field nerd to an extent. this kid translates to speed. Like sometimes you can just throw 10-4, 100-meter dash guy. He's fast. Well, they don't always play fast when they put on the football helmet. Barry and Brown, not only straight line fast, but the short area quicks for this kid, electric. He's one of those players that when he has the football in his hands, you kind of hold your breath. Who on Texas A&M was that? Probably Terry Bussey, and that's about it. I think you want to add another body like that. Barry and Brown, he's him.
Because you said it. Noah Thomas, I thought had a good year, but like I don't know that he is a really developing that like high level number one in the SEC. Like if that is your absolute guy, like I loved what he was doing. I thought he made a lot of progress, just pure route running, being able to create separation, catch the ball. But they just didn't stretch the field particularly well, I didn't think, especially from the boundary. Like their ability to tack down the sideline, it really wasn't particularly strong. You look at Barry and Brown, you said it. I think he's a really complete wide receiver, like kind of a gift. You just don't see a ton of these guys in the portal because he's really good. And if he's on your team, you typically do what you got to do to keep him. But he's there. I think he can add some explosiveness, and they really need it.
If you're Texas A&M, there's a lot of talented wide receivers for you to go out and get. Here's one again. You talk about vertical, big-bodied boundary wide receivers that can work vertically. Nick Anderson from Oklahoma. The knock on Nick Anderson is a little bit we've talked about him for some other teams. One-dimensional guy, like kind of just a vertical dude, and only 1 year of really some real production. 21 yards per catch in the 2023 season with Dillon Gabriel throwing him the rock. Why I like him so much for Texas A&M, it's something you hit on. We need a little bit more deeper third threat, especially with Texas A&M, where it's no secret like we want to run the football. 60+% rush plays for Texas A&M in 2024. You run the football, you force defenses to maybe throw another safety in the box, play with the single high one, get matchups on the outside. When they do that, we need the ability to win vertically down the field. Nick Anderson's that guy, 6'4", 220, average 21 yards per catch at Oklahoma in 2023. I think this would be.
Now, when you get into Nick Anderson, I'm not sure we really got to see him in a great fit, frankly. Last year, or in 2024, he hurt the whole season pretty much. And also that offense wouldn't have mattered because they were abysmal, obviously. But even with Dillon Gabriel, like, he's not exactly Dillon Gabriel's guy, just because of what you said, like his ability to work down the field. That's not exactly Gabriel's game. Gabriel, much more facilitator of an offense, doesn't have the strongest arm in the history of football. I think he's a guy, you put him in a different offense.
Yeah.
I think he'd be really productive.
Last one I'll throw out there, Kobe Prentice. And Dill, you like Kobe Prentice a lot. And look, that freshman, sophomore year when he was at Alabama, it's like this kid's got some juice, a lot of promise. Then Ryan Williams comes to town and struggles to get on the football field, struggles to produce, which can't blame him. Ryan Williams, kind of generationally talented wide receiver.
But even, frankly, another guy who you look at the fit, I mean, he's a slot receiver. That is his game. That wasn't exactly Milrow's game because Milrow was run the ball or throw the deep ball. That was kind of it. You look at what Jabri Barber did for this Texas A&M team, they need to replace that production because it did feel like Marcel Reed or Jabri Barber became Marcel Reed's guy.
Yes.
I think they need a guy who can separate around the line of scrimmage, create some of those easy throws. I think Kobe Prentice does a really good job with that. Again, we didn't really get to see him be super productive because that wasn't Alabama's offense under Jalen Milrow. But I think a guy who can give you some what Jabri Barber was giving, and that's something I think, again, you saw Marcel Reed kind of go along with Jabri Barber. I think that's a huge one.
Agreed. In Holman Wiggins, was the guy who recruited him to Alabama and who he had the most success under. Coach Wiggins has recruited a lot of wide receivers that are in the transfer portal right now. You're looking to maybe you said he's one of the best recruiters in the game, using some of those connections that he created to maybe bring some of that talent in the portal over. What's a really important position to the Coach Conklin offense? It's the tight end spot. This is not a knock on Trey Watson. Thought he was solid. Was he a difference maker? Probably not. Is Luke Haas a difference maker? Absolutely. From the state of Oklahoma. He hits the transfer portal this morning. His phone's probably hasn't stopped buzzing since that news that he hit the portal. You're looking for a difference maker at the tight end position. This kid's it if you're Texas A&M.
And I think he gives them that multi-dimensionality at the tight end spot where he's a good blocker. He's a really good pass catcher. Again, when you saw Colin Klein using a guy like Ben Sinnott at Kansas State, like really effective with that type of player. Now, again, he's a much better pass catcher. I think runs better routes, bigger, more physical, some of those things you want. but I think he's a good enough blocker to fit into that offense.
Oh, yeah, Luke Haas, he's not the biggest cat in the world. He blocks his tail off and do. We talk about this all the time. When you want to block at the tight end position, it's a lot more about effort than it is like your size. This kid brings it in the run blocking department, especially on the perimeter. And he's he's so crafty at the tight end spot. And that's kind of the number one trait. You can talk about size, speed. Yes, you want that, but you want those tight ends to just know how to get open. That's Luke Haas. He was having such a good freshman year before he got hurt. And then Taylor Green just didn't throw it to anybody besides Andrew Armstrong this year. I really like him. Dill, this is your guy, and probably the number one offensive tackle in the portal, Corey Robinson from Georgia Tech. And part of this conversation is who's coming back for Texas A&M. Like, there's a lot of guys that are fringe, could go to the NFL, could come back for another year. Trey Zoom, probably one of them. The problem here is they're both, career left tackle starters. Can one of them kick over to right is probably the conversation you have to have, but make no mistake about it. You're looking for an elite plug and play, all conference caliber tackle. Corey Robinson's
and it's just so hard to find that. Again, you gotta go pick a guy off from like the FCS or G5 level. In that, obviously, then you got to make the translation or the ability to project kind of into the SEC. Corey Robinson, like, I'm watching him play Georgia. I'm watching him play Miami.
He's awesome.
He's the guy who stands tall, and you just don't find offensive tackles. And I didn't think, frankly, the offensive tackle play for Texas A&M was good enough this year. So I look like, even just for the simple fact of having competition, like Trey Zoom had a better year than he had last year, but I still think that's a job you kind of want more competition.
Yeah. I'm optimistic about the offensive line. It's a hard position to just immediately turn over because it's really hard to build it through the portal. Mike Elko went out and grabbed 7 offensive linemen in the 2025 class. Like, they're getting thing right. Adam Cushing is going to get it right, but it's going to take some time. Dill, here's an interesting stopgap guy. He's going to be a 7th-year senior. I love this kid. Xavier Gray from Liberty, over 2,200 career snaps. What does Texas A&M want to do? They want to run the football. Is Xavier, and he's a career right tackle guy, and I think that's probably the if there was a tackle spot you want to address, it's right tackle.
Definitely.
What does Xavier Gray thrive at? Run blocking. This 6'8", 340, he just moves smaller body. And where did Texas A&M really struggle down the stretch with some of that short area stuff? Our bodies just not moving their bodies off the line of scrimmage. What better way to get that going than a 6'8", 340-pound offensive lineman in Xavier Gray? Big-time veteran, 7th-year senior, 2,200 snaps, big body, can move people off the line of scrimmage. Good enough in pass pro. That's probably the question mark, is can he hold up against some of those elite edge rushers that can attack his outside shoulder? But I like this kid, especially the fit with Texas A&M. Defensive line. That's probably the conversation, really the last conversation I think we have to have for Texas A&M, because I look at their linebacker room, like it. Look at the side. I think the secondary is going to be really good next year. But the defensive line, I think you're losing some really good players, right? Nick Gordon's going to the NFL, probably be a top 15 pick. Shamar Turner's gone too. Shamar Stewart, that's probably the conversation you're having. If you can get him back for one more year, and him and Cassius Howell, that is a very good edge spot. But one of the things I was kind of playing around with as I was prepping this, we need some depth. Like, those guys didn't really come off the field. All of those starting off defensive linemen, they played over 500 snaps a pop on the season. That's a lot, especially when you want to win late in the season, and especially when you want to win in the fourth quarter. You got to be able to rotate on the defensive line. Kelby Collins, right? Obviously, this Texas A&M staff have a lot of familiarity with Kelby Collins. They recruited him to Florida, had a good year under that staff as a true freshman, and then just didn't really play for Florida year 2. We just talked about him for South Carolina, but kind of a tweener, came in and they weren't really sure what to do with him. If he makes that full transition to the inside, which I think he will, he's up to around 280 pounds. This one, to me, I think would make a lot of sense for Texas A&M.
He's just, when you look at, can you get everything out of him? Because it just didn't feel like Florida ever got there. And it's not really a critique on Florida. Like, that happens, I feel like, with programs. Scooby Williams, another guy at Florida.
Yeah.
Talent. And then Texas A&M really got him playing good ball in that linebacker position. So he's a guy, certainly, if you can get him translating at a high level, he's a really big time hit. Now, again, I do think Texas A&M, like I look at, I'd probably like to also see them add another like more proven guy into that room. Because you're right, they do need to have some depth. That is going to be probably the issue with some of those guys leaving. And that's where I think getting to my guy, James Thompson. I look at a guy from Wisconsin, James Thompson, who injured for a good chunk of this 2024 year. I mean, you go back to 23, ultra disruptive, had some success with another Wisconsin guy in Rodis Johnson, who I think gave Texas kind of the snaps they were looking for. Like, do I think he's a full-time starter on Texas A&M? Possibly not, but I think in situations, I think he can rush the passer well. I think he can give you some of that penetrating ability that Rodis Johnson gave him. I think he's a guy you'd be pretty comfortable in terms of what he's going to do. I don't think he gives you the upside of a Kelby Collins, but he gives you a pretty defined production, I'd say.
James Thompson excites me. I question about the physicality in the
A little
SEC.
lean for sure, but
Yeah.
he's athletic, long, and he does.
Yeah, and maybe like a pass rush specialist because he can rush the passer quite well. Question marks about him holding up on first and second down, stopping the run. Can you find a McKinley Jackson 2.0? That's kind of what I felt like Texas A&M was missing this year. You had a bunch of like dog penetrators, a lot of guys that could get upfield, but you didn't have a lot of guys who were just going to sit there and two gap and eat up double teams, do some of that dirty work. And I think that's why you saw some of those big runs get popped against
When a
Texas
lot of that,
A&M.
frankly, is Hicks developing, I think, because Hicks is a guy who I think can give you some of that ability, but also like at his best, he's a guy who I think can just dominate across. Like I think he can be a good job in eating up blocks and being physical. I think he's got the upside to be more disruptive as well. So that spot to me especially is like, what do you get from DJ Hicks next year in terms of like, can he be a down-to-down starter who just kind of dominates football games?
Agreed. The last guy I have is Justice Boone, another Florida cat that I think could play. Like you go back to what is this, 18 months ago now, 2023 fall practice. You're hearing a ton of buzz about this guy. Season-ending injury, didn't really look the same in 2024. Can you get him back to what we were hearing about before the 2023 season? Not going to be an all-conference guy, most likely, but a guy that's a really good depth piece on the defensive line. Also, familiarity with the staff.
And a physical edge, because I look at their defense,
agreed.
like even if you get a Cassius Howell back, a Ryland, like those type of guys or a Kennedy Ryland, I should say. I was blanking on the name for a second, but those type of guys, a little bit more like juice, athletic pass rushers, need one of those physical defensive ends. I look at Justice Boone, like certainly not an elite pass rusher, I wouldn't say, but very, very tough against the run, can play that physical style that I think some of the other edge rushers who might be back on this A&M team next year really don't do as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll see where Texas A&M decides to go. A lot of different options. I think this is going to be an attractive destination for a lot of transfer portal players. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.